Hello and welcome to Platform Diaries Summer Edition. I'm Shane Williams. Over the summer break, it's my great pleasure to share with you some of the interviews that I conducted for my book, The Platform Owner's Guidebook. The guests are a delight and offer valuable insights on technology and strategy. I hope you enjoy these bonus episodes.
Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
Hello and welcome to the summer edition of Platform Diaries. I'm your host, Shane Williams. Today's guest is Nigel Dalton, a social scientist, AI thought leader, and the Godfather of Agile in Australia. Nigel shares his experiences of implementing complex systems and the industry move towards techno-social. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. Well, Nigel, thanks for joining me. Nigel and I worked together some time ago at a small company you might have heard of called realestate.com.au. Nigel was kind enough to shepherd me through the organisation, having come from big corporate, and introducing me to some of the subtleties that are required in the Agile and the startup world. So I thought it'd be a good chance for us to catch up again after a little while and just see what's been going on, shoot the shit, and talk about some of the things that we're passionate about. Thanks for joining me, mate.
Yeah, this is a great chance for us to reflect. And although we work in sort of two different circles in the world of techno-social, which is what I call it, our worlds have overlapped a little, haven't they?
Yeah, indeed. And I think that'd be interesting to explore today too. So, it's been a while since we left RM. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, well, look, it's all a bit different, having been the chief information officer and then the looking after research and development at that group. And that was such a journey. That was a real growth journey for me, and quite an interesting moment in my career. I've spent most of my career fixing broken things, and the REA 7.5 years was all about how, when you got the wind in your sails, how do you take advantage of that? And I was pretty used to sort of just trying to minimize things and manage risk and manage costs and not spend money on stuff. And here we were, the imperative was grow this thing as fast as you can to gain every ounce of ground you can, whilst Facebook, Google, Amazon, and eBay and everyone are piling into the property market. So I learned a lot there. I changed course now. I'm sort of in semi-retirement, working for a wonderful global consulting company called ThoughtWorks, who are I describe them, they don't in their marketing, but I describe them as a techno-social company. A company that is very comfortable in the world of tech, which is what their 25 years has been all about, having this incredible realization, good tech involves people. And that social aspect, whether you consider it a constraint, because the people ruin everything, right? Or whether you consider it an amplifier and a leverage point, I'm delighted to say that's kind of my field. I'm a social scientist, which I actually have a bachelor's degree in. So I feel after all these decades, I'm finally doing what I got a university degree in. So that's my new job. I kind of help with some pretty big change projects, thinking about where techno and social. Do you remember it used to be the business versus IT?
Yeah.
That was always the conversation. The business wants.
Yeah, business needs this. Yeah.
There's a lot of multidisciplinary teams focused on customer outcomes, human-centered design, all these new things now. I love that space. I love multidisciplinary. And like you've reflected of having, your amazing white paper on implementing Salesforce. You've reflected on the same. That it's not a technical problem, is it?
No, I think, I talk about it in the white paper, but it's what you put around the tech that either makes you successful or not. And I think that's where the value comes from. I use the analogy of the gym membership being, if you don't use it, you're not going to get value. You got to put the effort in. And I think the same applies to the people and processes you put around the technology. You can have the shiniest piece of tech in the world, and I use Salesforce as the example. But if you haven't got the right people around it operating the right way with the right connection with your customer, then you're not going to get the value, and it's ultimately going to be perceived as a poor investment. And really the answer is nothing to do with the licensing or to do with the cost of the software. It's how you leverage it.
And it's so interesting to me you're using that language of what's around it. That's become the hot new thing. So because you're a proper academic, so that's when I met you. You'd done your degree and written your paper and all those kind of stuff. I'm sort of a pseudo academic, can't stand the discipline of it. So, but I'm reflecting at the moment on an incredible change in an understanding of how things work in business and in organizations. So I literally a century ago, the world of physics changed dramatically after 250 years of Newtonian physics about, there was laws of gravity and energy, and, they were immutable laws. Some of them started to get a bit frayed at the edges after 150 years, like was light a beam or a wave? And the problem was you could do an experiment that proved it was both. Yeah. And that was so troubling to the kind of the keepers of what was true in physics that it got repressed. And then by 1900, there's a generation of young punk physicists and mathematicians are going, no, we have to walk up to this. And so we got quantum mechanics, which is quite a complex field of viewing nature. And in quantum mechanics theory, it's all about mathematics. It's all about electrons and the mathematical probability of it being here, and then going, it can be in both places at the same time. It can be two things at once. And it was an incredible revolution that led to everything we're all these computers we're talking on today. We're having the same moment in management thinking today, where we've gone from a very traditional command and control belief in the way organizations run that was handed to us from 100 years ago, to a world where, with new language, which can be very confusing, we're starting to talk about how organizations are, we're not so certain. And scaffolding is a really key concept within that. So how you wrap things. Yeah. And it's like you think of a building where you're redecorating or you're construction, you use scaffolding around it to create it. And that's a much, much better way of thinking about implementing software and changing organizations and making things better, is having scaffolding. And there's all different dimensions of scaffolding. You've spent time in Asia and you see those unbelievable bamboo scaffoldings around construction sites. They are very fit for purpose, incredibly strong and flexible and cheap and disposable and look remarkable scale that they can get to. We use different scaffolding here in Australia. We have different constraints, and it's all made of steel and it's locked together and all those kind of things. But it's a new thing. There's probably several words we might cover today. Scaffolding's number one for me because it's how you make change. If you're implementing something as complex, and complexity is the next thing we need to talk about, is something as complex as a CRM, you do it by not doing the traditional thing of imagining that end point in mind, but by grounding in what you are, building scaffolding, which is the constraints of your project, and then discovering your way up through it. And it's radical. It's removing a lot of the fantasy we held about how easy it was. If I buy Salesforce, my customer problems are over. Yeah. So scaffolding can be as simple as, well, let's have a daily stand-up. Let's have lunch together and talk about how the project's going. And in some ways, an enterprise platform is its own scaffolding. It comes in the box with, it is what it is. You've got divisions and components of it, but you can't let that be a scaffolding that constrains your project. You've got to bring the people around it as well. Does Salesforce have a module which is change management in it, or that's down to people like you, isn't it?
Well, the best way to describe that is mine's better. Let's put it that way. It's interesting, we talk about this concept of building the CRM and building the scaffolding and finding your way through. And I think, it wasn't that long ago that even myself, I was talking about, Salesforce is this solid foundation upon which you can build. But I think whilst that's true, you have no one builds a foundation that just starts knocking up a high rise without the scaffolding, right? And I think that's analogously, that's the key, right?
It is. Look, it's the key to not wasting a huge amount of money. And I mean, funnily enough, I go way back with Salesforce. So I was part of a startup in San Francisco on the corner of Mission and Beale Streets downtown near the water. 2 buildings over was another startup. They're a little bit further along than us, some company called Salesforce. And there was a bar on Beale Street where we used to meet and have beers as the tech kind of people and compare the misery of our lives. We used similar tech architectures with Sunboxes and Java and all those kind of things. And as a result, we became a bit of a beta test place for a number of early features. Cases, the tracking of work as it flows through. We were one of the very first people on that. I think if they still have their own tracking tool, you'll find my name in there with a bunch of suggestions on how that works, their marketplaces, all those kind of things. So, look, I'm a massive fan, but I've seen it win and lose over that time and starting to see a pattern. And it's related to getting humans to use the darn thing and accepting that organizations have this innate complexity. And that's hard to do. When I grew up, I kept told by my bosses, "Oh no, your job is to keep it simple, stupid."
Yeah.
And failure seemed to come relatively often when I oversimplified things. So I'm now a fan of dealing with complexity.
Yeah, it's funny, that idea of, keep it simple. I used to work for a guy who would tell this story. He said, went to a meeting one day and these guys are telling me this problem is so complex. And he said, I was, off the cuff made this remark. It's like 12 lines of code, just get it done today. And, I think 12 months later and, 220 million lines of code later, the project actually went live and, custom software development project. And, he reflected on that and said, all I ever get, everyone I meet from that project, 20 years later, all I hear is 12 lines of code, this oversimplification of the problem. And it's interesting. I think we all learn those lessons.
So that's why I like your kind of gym membership metaphor, because it's got all those human dimensions about motivation.
Yeah.
Explain it to me one more time, though. Tell me again. So how does that work?
Well, so the history behind this analogy comes from my reticence to use a gym, right? So I joined, first gym I ever joined was at the Herald in Melbourne. Geez, it would have been early 2000, maybe mid-2000s, 2007-ish, right? And it was, we're putting in a gym and it's going to be $5 a week and you're going to get this value out of it, right? And yeah, no worries, take it straight out of my pay. And I don't think I went for the first 2 years, just, paying away your $5 a week. And then eventually going, you know what, I'm starting to feel a bit unhealthy. I've now got kids who I need to be able to keep up with. I should probably get a bit healthier. And, you do the January New Year's resolution thing. And January, February, that gym is packed. Every morning, every afternoon, everybody's in there. Come March, it dwindles. And by the end of March, there's the regulars. You're going back to the, true believers that go through. And I went through, decided that, I've really got to do something about this. This is the goal I'm going for. And I pushed through that barrier, went to the gym for the best part of a year. Got down to the ideal weight I wanted to be, took the kids camping, got the dirt bikes out, riding around, teaching them to ride dirt bikes out in the paddock. All day, the kids are at me, you ride the bike. Remember, it's a 50cc. I shouldn't be on the thing, right?
Yeah.
And eventually the youngest goes, nah, Dad, it's your turn, you ride the bike. And I thought, all right, I'll be a show off, So I'm up on the back wheel, screaming past them, doing a mono. Then I fall off the back, break my coccyx. That's the end of my gym career for the next 9 months.
Right.
Ouch. And I was flying to Sydney 3 days a week for work, right? So I got to know the hosties really well because I was that guy who couldn't sit down on the plane. That becomes an interesting challenge when you've got to be on a plane a couple of times a week. So, it got me thinking about that story and thinking, well, how much money did I spend on that gym membership for the reward that I got and then for the amount of time I actually used it over the life cycle? And that's when it came to me thinking, you know what? Anything is valuable if you're receiving the value, and definition of value largely depends on, everybody has a different opinion. And even when you talk to an organization, the CFO, CEO, everybody will have a different opinion necessarily on value of a particular thing. So I thought about that and I thought, you know what? I had this gym membership and for 2 years, I just couldn't be bothered cancelling it, but I never got any value out of it whatsoever. And I think these investments in platforms are the same. People go in there with the big sell, like Salesforce does a great job in telling you all the things you could do.
Yes.
But it doesn't do them just by turning the key. But I think we go in going, this is going to solve all the problems. I have this list of problems. This solution solves this list of problems. Turn the key and it's going to work. And when it doesn't, there's this dissolution and an immediate, well, I'm not getting the value you promised. And I think
that sunk cost fallacy too, where you've spent so much on the gym so far. It's like, well, geez, it's a whole year. I better work on that. I've spent all this money on it. I better now do something with it. I couldn't throw it away. I can't stop going to the gym and paying my fee. Subscriptions are the same, aren't they? Like, I think there's a lot of people who've got a lot of subscriptions to web services or TV channels, all those kind of things. And, they watch one football, one rugby game on Sky or something, but they're paying $80 a month. But it's really like, and human indecision's a big part of that.
Yeah. I mean, you think about the traditional subscription TV model, right? I would pay for subscription TV because for 6 to 9 months of the year, I wanted to watch sport. But there's a whole period where there is absolutely no sport on or nothing that I'm interested in. If it was just me, I would just, cancel it during that quarter. But you know that now the family might want to watch a movie or two, so you keep paying for the remainder of the 12 months. And now you think about these subscription models where they're being very niche, right? You've got the Binge and the KO and those sorts of similar products globally, and talking about, well, now I can turn these things on and off. So the whole perception of value and continuing to deliver value from these things really flips back onto the vendor to be, all over that, right?
Yeah. So your metaphor, yeah. So, I mean, coming out of lockdown now, I'm going back to mountain biking. I'm suddenly feeling I've got to get competitive again. I'm going to get a good return out of my kind of all-rounder program rather than cycling specific program that I do at the gym. So it's time for me to actually step up and get that subscription back going again. But yeah, I know your model talks about different rates of return. If you're leaning into it and you're a competitive athlete, you get a 10-to-1 return from your gym. Whereas if you're just a couch potato, Negative. But
what's interesting in this too, and it applies to the elite sports analogy, it applies there as it applies to these software investments, right? Is that standing still actually doesn't exist. Standing still is actually going backwards. I mean, you put all that effort in there to be competitive at, an elite athletic level. You don't win your first race and then go, you beauty, I'm now at this level. I will maintain this by just sitting on the couch. You automatically start to go backwards if you're not continually. And I think the same applies to these investments around platforms, right? If you want to continually get value, you've got to continually, work the muscle. And I feel like a lot of people go into these investments thinking it's an implementation program that lasts 12 months and is going to cost us, several $1 million. But at the end of that, we'll just continue to drive that benefit in perpetuity. And the answer is no, you're not. Not if you don't keep flexing the muscle.
Yeah, that it'll run itself. And look, that's where our worlds cross over again. I'm chair of the Lean Enterprise group for this part of the world, so a big fan of the Toyota ways of working. The hardest part is the continuous improvement mindset of people going, no, I just want to fix it and then I'm fixed forever. And us having to go, well, you can't sign up to this lean thing without committing to Kaizen. And a case of never being satisfied with where you've got to, knowing there's further improvement to be had. It's quite difficult to convince people that that's the case.
Yeah, and it's a difficult pill to swallow, right? If you knew going in that your, $500,000 a year worth of software licensing was actually going to cost you $3 million, your business case might not stand up.
Isn't it funny? I've seen so many business cases for CRM where the cost was $1 million and the benefits were $1,001. And of course, the level of governance that goes onto those business cases is significant, and you're just underestimating the risk around it. But yeah, so what do you reckon is the path to success? What's the recipe?
I think the answer is so multifaceted that it's, as you talked about, right? It's about that complex and complexity. And I think without scaring people off, I think the answer is I came up with this, 6 domains model. But if you think about fundamental there is, have you got the people and the processes that are going to set you up for success? And then it doesn't matter which piece of technology it is, in my view. But I think if you really understand, you're committed to that continuous improvement piece, and then you've got the right people who are invested in the outcome and who are, autonomous and they're highly productive and they're, really invested in getting the outcome, then it's really about protecting that investment and making sure you've got the right, I call it the right level of investment. That doesn't necessarily mean continually to tip money into something that doesn't make sense, but it's about controlling the right investment and then measuring and making sure you're getting the right outcome, and then keeping people on that journey. And I say people, we talked about earlier on about, you could be in two places at once. And I think the answer is, there is no tech and business and the business needs this and tech's going to deliver. I think it's when you bring those two together and say, we're actually tech-led now, and therefore we are one and the same thing, then it gets really sort of homogenous and it starts to, evolve. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, I see a whole new generation of people emerging now who are techno-social.
Yeah.
And that's an exciting thought for me as a social scientist, seeing a new capability emerge. And this millennial generation, perfectly comfortable with technology. And if it adds value or not, they're quick to judge. And away they'll go. The drama is my generation, there's a bunch of 56-year-old white guys running organizations who are deeply frightened of their mobile phone and all of the devices and the data that's coming at them. Look at the quantity of information coming at a typical executive today. They're not entirely comfortable with adding more tech, but they go, oh, look, it's magic. All tech is good. I'll write the $1 million check to make that happen. From a lean perspective, it's like, there's sort of 5 things to think about in any project. And we're implementing our own version of CRM and using Salesforce as it happens at ThoughtWorks at the moment. So I wrote here's my lean thinking on this. And it's got the 5 key principles of lean, which were written a long time ago in a book by Jim Womack. First, identify what is valuable to the customer. Rule 1, well, who is the customer and what are you trying to achieve for them? And one of the interesting dimensions of that around CRM is who is the customer? Is the customer the salesperson who needs their, information and intelligence? Or are you actually serving the end customer? Yeah. And lean would encourage us to think about the end customer.
Yeah.
So it's a radical start point. Would your end customer like you to spend $1 million on something that made you better at servicing them? And the answer is, yeah, you know what? They'd probably pay for that.
Yeah.
They'd probably actually be happy you putting 1 cent on the price of your product if you could actually call them on time, or when they rang, you knew who they were, or you included them in a timely fashion in new offers.
Yeah.
But rule number 1 of lean and lean management, always start with that customer. Number 2, just use a concept called value streams. So start with that customer and have a string of Post-it notes back as to how that value got delivered to them and who by. You do the current state, and then you're allowed to do a kind of more of a dream state. This is where people go wrong all the time. A lack of knowledge of how business is done in an organization derails so many projects. I remember with CRM before you arrived, right? But we had a crack at that in about 2014, 2015. And we got the value stream wrong. We used it for a particular aspect of the business. It was helping to manage the conversation with property developers spending money on display adverts. So we wanted a bunch of things to converge at the crucial moment of the conversation. Was there advertising availability? Who is this person? What is their contract rate? What activity have they had? And look intelligent in front of them and not overlap and step all over each other for servicing the customers. And we mapped the value stream from one person's perspective, and it wasn't what other people understood how the work worked. We then proceeded to build that entire scaffolding of using Salesforce's sort of modules as the scaffolding, built it, and they did not come, I have to say. We couldn't get adoption.
The interesting part about that was when I landed and we got to have a look under the hood of that technical implementation was brilliant. Some of the ways that was stitched together for its time, and you could look at it and go, wow, there was some smart engineers involved in putting this thing together. But as you say, technically brilliant, totally useless.
What an unbelievable waste of money. But I'll tell you what, it was difficult to have an honest conversation about the fact that it didn't work. And look, I grew a tiny bit cynical. I'd love your opinion on this, is that I do think there's a generation of salespeople who would love to have on their LinkedIn profile sort of Salesforce literate, Salesforce certified. I don't know what they do in that regard, because it's great for it's like career-driven development. Is that fair, or am I being cruel?
For techies or for salespeople themselves?
The salespeople themselves. They were super enthusiastic for it, having it, because it's
I feel like there's 2 camps. There's I'm super enthusiastic, and I don't know that there's a middle ground. I feel like there's I'm super enthusiastic because I can see the value of, having this V8 under the hood. And then there's the others who go, no way known. All that is just Big Brother, and it adds no value to my sales process. And you're in one camp or the other. And I think jumping between the camps is a huge chasm to jump. And it largely comes down to your first experience, and was it a good implementation and a good change and adoption program? And was it built for what you needed to service your customer, or was it built around somebody had the wrong idea, or we're just taking it out of the box, or, you know, all the things that get maybe the mistakes that many of people including myself, have made over time. And if you've landed in one of those, then you'll never come back. So I think it really depends.
Yeah. I really liked what you did when you did implement it, because you started with those customer stories. You started with lean point one. What do we want to do? And some of them are quite humble stories about what we wanted to achieve, was make our salespeople look intelligent in front of our customers. And actually, you know what? That's great for the customer, because they're getting, you know, they've got limited time as a real estate agent in the day. They want a really functional, efficient, productive conversation with their rep. And if that rep's scrounging around, I don't know where, where's your pricing, blah, 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 that's a really unproductive thing to do. And but gee, to get that, you did a few miles, didn't you?
We did, and we definitely didn't get it ready the first, second, or even third time. I don't think it was kind of a journey. And it's interesting. Even now, there are, as I understand it, still factions in the sales group, as well as from an adoption perspective. There's groups who we really got it right for, and they saw the benefit of that, intelligent conversation with the customer, and would actually describe to me, what I really like doing is sitting in front of someone and saying, I understand you and the market you're operating in, and I've looked at the numbers and I can see your competitors are doing this.
Yeah.
But you know what? You're competing against, Joe Blogs down the road, and you think you're the two biggest real estate agents in town, but what you're not seeing is that's only 40% of the market. So whilst you're trying to steal his customers, you're both foregoing the other 60%. I can see all that data, and I'm telling you, ignore that guy and go after this. And I can help you with some real estate advertising. And I think when they're having that intelligent conversation about how to help grow the customer's business rather than how to get money in their back pocket, then the light bulb goes off, and then they go, I get the value of this. But if we miss that, to your point, miss what's the end customer need. The end customer wants to be educated about how to build and grow their business. They don't care about your revenue. And if you can have that intelligent conversation because you've built it thinking 2 steps ahead, then I think you solve the problem.
And what lean requires you to do is be part of, have a stake in that end customer's business.
Yeah.
And what remarkably happens, if you serve them well and you help them grow their business, their real estate agency in our case, guess what? You grow as well.
Yeah.
But those who are obsessed with just their own growth come at that problem from a different angle. And lean says, always go to the end of the value stream, and that's your customer, and have them pull that through your value stream. So just being able to think in systems like this and sort of sense the territory and observe not what you believe it theoretically should be, but what it is. The human dimension of that's so important. I mean, I can remember some tough conversations with people who are going, all the CRM is going to do is micromanage me.
Yeah.
Or like, I am skilled in the art of relationship building, and that's why you hired me, and now you want to micromanage my tasks by making me enter data into this field with probabilities of success, and I feel bad about that. Yeah. How do you deal with that aspect of these sort of change management elements?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I come from the opposite area. I run my own practice now, right? I'm selling me largely, and yes, I haven't necessarily spent the entirety of my career learning the art of being the most, eloquent salesperson. And so maybe I'm coming at this from a different angle. But what I realize is that I need to have lots of conversations with lots of people. And I'm not that good at remembering everything I said to everybody all the time. And I could scroll it all down in a notepad and then flip back through and try and find that sort of stuff. But I feel like, that it's Big Brother and putting my data into a place is about someone, keeping an eye on me. But I look at it, well, I'm the only one looking at me anyway. But I feel like that makes a hell of a lot of sense for me to be able to really quickly pick up, I'm going to go and see this person today. What am I talking to them about? What did we talk about last time? And what's happened since? And be able to have that intelligent conversation. I think from a change perspective, it's really about what's in it for that person to be able to, what does the end customer need? How's that conversation going to go? How does that salesperson want to feel, and how do they want to feel like they're projecting the projection of them to their customer, and how can you help facilitate that? I think that's the key.
Yeah, I agree. And some of those human problems that they're having, as the social scientist, those aren't related to the CRM at all. Those are contextual parts of the organization you have to sense. And this is the kind of the next 21st century quantum management theory, is sense finding, and your ability and instinct as an analyst or otherwise to see the landscape of which you're landing a project is incredibly critical, because there's networks at play. I love the way Salesforce is provides us with a view of an organization, because you have to kind of key it in structurally. Where does this person fit? And org charts are one sense of an organization. Cost centers are another. Sometimes org charts and cost centers are out of sync in organizations because you just changed all over time. And then the third, way of sensing an organization is the informal networks. And there was this incredible research done. It was IBM. So I went to an amazing talk, which I'll find the link for, and you can have your listeners look at it. It's this group of the absolute leading thinkers around complexity did a series of lectures. Jay Bloom, Dave Snowden, Sonia Bligno, Nigel Thurlow, Manuel Pays, Matthew Skelton. The data they had around organizations and change, very cutting edge. And they were saying they'd done a study that IBM had this ratio of formal to informal networks. And for every formal network, there were 64 informal employee networks. And how does change actually happen, and how does adoption happen? It's those informal networks that you sometimes now see in Slack emerging as groups. But something like Salesforce doesn't really cope with the informal network where you get educated. It's who you ring to go, look, I've got this thing. How do I do it? And really structured enterprise software struggles with those informal networks. Is AI the solution to that? Like the magical assistant running around and pulling it out for us?
Yeah, there's an interesting one. How good's the AI going to be? It's going to need the same input, right? If you're not telling it, well, how's it going to work?
Yeah, AI, of course, one of my hobbies. Got to plug AI Australia, Australia's #1 artificial intelligence podcast by two white guys, recorded on a Thursday afternoon in Melbourne, that very small niche. And the thing with AI, and I always talk about it from the folk sense of it, it's you've got to do three things. You've got to collect, connect, and correct. And this is fundamentally where CRM is anchored, collection of data. If you've got no data collected, then you're never going to get any kind of machine learning or help to make you more productive from any kind of AI. And then connecting is like, well, you probably don't have all of the data in the right place. Have you got your finance system data? Do you know what their spend was last month? Is that connectable with the data around how many phone calls you've made them? Are you doing that dot connecting, which human AI is so amazing at doing, by the way, but not at scale? And finally, you have to commit to correcting your behavior and correcting your actions based on the data and the insights and the connections. And all three of those are a human problem, mate. There's no software problem in any of those. But collecting data, that's the starting point. And having somewhere to put it, that's where a CRM comes in.
Yeah, that's interesting. Then connecting, you think about the elements that you would need to get a really good view on where your end customers at. You talk about what's their financial, are they buying more, buying less, have their spending behavior changed? Has that got any correlation to how many times you've spoken to them or what you've spoken to them about? Are they interacting with your service team? And is there something in there that goes, you know what? The last thing you want to do, if you're going out there to project this, I understand you and your business, Mr. Customer, and I want to talk to you about this new product, only to find out that they've been having all sorts of problems with their existing product and they've been on the phone trying to get a refund for 6 months.
Yeah,
you look like a bit of a dick. So
and you're the first person to turn up and actually listen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all well and good to go, well, I came here to flog you something and now I've just copped it in the ear. But what, imagine how that changes when you ring them proactively 3-4 weeks before you're due to go out and go, I've just noticed you've had a couple of interactions. I'll sort it out for you. Let me get under the hood of that and fix it. Mm-hmm. Then you go out there and go, hey, I'm here to see you. And they go, wow, thanks for your help because I was really struggling to get that sorted. That changes your whole approach to that conversation, right? So stitching all that stuff together and then making sense of it, that's...
And I think it's about scale. You're an organization of one, I'm in an organization of 8,000. Or an organization of one when I'm sitting here. And it definitely, in my work around growth organizations and scaling organizations, you need to do things and invest in systems before you grow too much. So is it appropriate for an organization of one to have a CRM? Absolutely. Because when you become an organization of three, and there's a tech founder, there's you, and there's someone else who's doing sales, the disconnection that can occur isn't threefold, it's ninefold. And when you hit 15, you're going to need some things that in the old days you might have thought were just for big bureaucracies. But all that way through, my kind of strategic advice is invest in things before you need them. Because I look at startups and go, you've really got no record at all of who you called at the MVP stage and called and failed with because you didn't think you were ready for a CRM. And I go, no, that's terrible advice. You definitely need to think about a structured way of working with customers.
And, take Salesforce off the table, right? For small startups, there's a number of CRMs. I mean, at the end of the day, the tech itself can be agnostic, right? How are you making use of it? Are you getting in early enough? Are you connecting the data? I mean, there's some of the keys straight up, right?
And equally now we're geographically spread. I mean, do you think we'll ever go back to the office and have that war room wall of all the customers and our strategy? And I don't think so, mate.
No.
And I think that chance to engage the good people from anywhere, from, New Zealand and Indonesia and Manila and China and Western Australia even, all working on the same team does involve systems and does involve platforms. And now I need to know what you said.
Yeah. 100%, particularly with time zone differences, right? Not everybody's going to be able to go, oh, well, I'll just work in the North American time zone. Like, it just doesn't practically work. So the ability to kind of follow the sun and, regardless of geography, be able to keep in touch asynchronously, but stay on the same page. There's a whole systems challenge in that, right?
I'll tell you what I've been curious about, collect, connect, correct, right? The connect piece. The speed with which people move around, the decay rate of data in CRM seems stupendously difficult to manage. And we were having this conversation recently and go, you know what, as much as we're putting in this thing and we're interested in tracking a particular effort in a particular sector, everyone leaps into LinkedIn. Like in terms of contacts, which was a very, very traditional use of CRM.
Yeah.
What's the decay rate of data in a typical CRM around individuals?
I think it's probably proportionate to the decay rate or churn in your sales teams and a number of other factors, right? But interestingly enough, and I follow the same principle, go to where the customer's putting the data or go to where the person you're trying to contact is keeping it up to date themselves. They're not going to log into your CRM and update your data for you, right? But in my Salesforce CRM, I've got a custom field for LinkedIn profile specifically on those records because I figure, given COVID and the amount of movement in people's jobs in the market, I'm never going to keep up with all the movements of everybody that I talk to. But I know they're most likely to be updating that more or less, within a month of changing roles, right? So good chance, even if their mobile changes, I'll be able to find it. And I think that's an interesting one, right? Is that what the traditional role of the CRM being, I've got this, Bible of, the digital Rolodex of, whatever.
Yep.
Now, those pages are, as you say, decaying in that Rolodex at, probably an even more exponential rate at the moment, given the amount of movement in the market.
Yeah, and I think enterprises need to think about that stuff. And it surprised me that Salesforce didn't buy LinkedIn. That was, to me, would have been a pretty unholy alliance of customer data, that's for sure. But I don't see Microsoft doing anything with it like they probably should accordingly. But therein lies the complexity of mapping a strategy for an organization, is starting with that, well, who's your customer, and then being really rational about it, and then getting them to the continuous improvement mindset. when they really just want a magic solution that makes everything else go away and does all the work.
Maybe and it's probably business and business model aligned in some respects. So if you think about a subscription business, with the exception of people who, unsubscribe, you would imagine that there'd be a good chance that the data that you've got on your customers in a subscription model is largely up to date, right? So, But I could be wrong. I mean, I'm thinking traditional subscriptions like, Foxtel, things like that.
Yeah.
Because you're tied to a physical address, and if you move, they need to come and move the kit. It's probably a good chance that your data is going to be kept up to date. But, if you're getting a digital Netflix subscription and then you move house and it just moves with you, will you remember to go and update your details? Probably not.
The data I saw was surprising. I think it was like 15% of people change their phone number every year. So we forget as kind of an older generation of going, I'm having this phone number until I die. Yeah. I'm taking it with me. And whereas, I look at I've got a 19-year-old, he changed his number a couple of times, got a different phone for that, and no consequence at all.
No.
It's like back onto Facebook, tell everyone the new phone number, job done.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I think that, we tied ourselves to either a physical address, an email address, or a phone number as, something that you could rely on would probably follow me around. And I suspect that's the etymology of CRMs, right? The key record is probably one of those two things, if not, email or phone number. And yet this new generation, as you say, my identity is tied to my social media profile, and whichever is the most popular social media system at the time is where I am.
Yeah. And look, it's getting such a crazy world. I just added Telegram to my list. It's like, because all the cool kids told me that to get off WhatsApp. WhatsApp is literally what my 85-year-old dad uses, right? It's like, okay, it's time to get off that. Telegram's where all the cool kids are. So I've had to load that on now. But if I look at the number of messaging platforms on my screen, it's becoming quite difficult. Yeah. In a world where we should be getting technology that helps us unify that. Yeah. I'm not sure it's the world we set out to design.
Behind those, they've kind of used, if you think about WhatsApp and a few others, right, they're still tying them to a record that is your unique identifier as your phone number in a lot of cases, yeah?
Yeah, very much so. The nightmare of that change accordingly. Hey, let me introduce you to another techno-social hot term of the moment, because it's helping people design systems and organizations and things. It might work in your world. And it's the concept of cognitive load.
Mm-hmm.
And the perfect software design team size, product, software, digital team is effectively one that can manage the load of understanding the changes to a system and maintaining the system and what that requires. So you can't go loading more stuff on or you'll break them. Like, I just want you to manage this one as well. And can you do the BAU maintenance on this one and this one? So sizing a team is done by how much load can they carry.
Yeah.
So that strikes me as an interesting thing around salespeople as well, for example. Their cognitive load they can carry. Can they offload some of that into a CRM?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I guess the answer is yes, right? I looked at a lot of this stuff around cognitive load when you're thinking about, sort of software engineering teams. And it was part of the research I was doing around, what does the ideal value-based stream engineering teams in a Salesforce platform look like? And the work that, what's the name? The book's called Team Topologies. I can't think of the authors.
Emmanuel Pais and Matthew Skelton. Yeah.
And really interesting work around cognitive load, applying cognitive load to the software engineering practice, and then that concept of, value teams and, teams that cross over and whatnot. But I never thought to apply it to salespeople. But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, how many customers have I got? How many products am I trying to sell? What's the right product mix? How are my customers performing? All those data points, and then trying to load that for a territory that could be thousands of customers. They're never going to be able to maintain all that relationship and keep all that information together. So I think, that's where these systems come into play.
Yeah, because we've all met that super salesperson, haven't we, who just magically has all that stuff at their fingertips, and they're probably a unique personality and probably got some psychological disorder to be able to hold that amount of trivial information at their fingertips. So we do need technological ways of helping manage that today.
And we talked before about change, and I think it's those people who are that sort of mystical, I can keep it all together in my head salesperson that end up being kind of the cornerstones in some of those unofficial communications networks. And probably when the time comes to try and enact the change in an organization to digitize some of this stuff, they're probably if you can break them, if you can kind of take them on your journey, break them in the sense of a horse, then, you can kind of ride that to success.
Hey, I'm going to get some free consulting from you because I had an interesting argument recently. Someone with a growing business, and they had the remnants of a CRM, Excel spreadsheets, all sorts of stuff, and people's records on their mobile phones. And they were obsessing about migration. They're obsessing about how to automate the migration of data from their old system and all the ancillary systems to a fresh new one that was going to solve all their problems. And here was my advice, and you probably did advise something quite differently. I was going, you know what? Stop obsessing about migrations. Start again. Roll a line. Start again. Type it in.
Yeah.
I was being deliberately controversial. What's your counsel to companies who are inevitably outgrowing what they've had in terms of processes and systems? Do you obsess about a migration, or?
I think it depends on the scale of the organization and how legacy that initial solution is. So, like when we talked about REA, the initial implementation at REA was keep it simple in terms of just get customer data in terms of contact information and relationship to company. But let's not try and get into the depths of prior revenue and committed spend and all that. Let's just start small and eat the elephant one bite at a time. But I think it depends probably on scale and how much legacy you've got in those solutions. A lot of the smaller clients that I talk to say the same thing. You know what? Here's an opportunity to refresh and update that information rather than trying to massage what you had from multiple sources. And you just say, you know what? That's up to a point. Beyond this point is a great opportunity for us to go and reach out to every customer that we haven't seen for a while. And as part of that process, we put fresh data into the new platform. And then if there's legacy stuff that needs to happen, we'll just write it out in the old solution and we go, you know what, all new purchases in the new system, all new activity in the new system, and take it forward and eventually deprecate the old information. But a great opportunity to refresh it organically without having to obsess about the complexity of, is the data right? Who's going to update it? You can get a bunch of admins in to clean up a spreadsheet, but they've got no context of the customer. So do I know that this is the right address? I've got no idea. Is it the right phone number? Is this person still work there? They're not going to know. And so you say, well, the only other way to do that is take salespeople off the road and get them to update their territory. Yeah. And then you're burning revenue. Does that make any sense? Or do you just do it organically as you see each customer and use it as an opportunity? The answer is yes, maybe, depending on the organization. It comes back to that complexity conversation, right?
Yeah, my friend Sarah Bell, who's a partner or founder of a company called AIRE, AIRE. So they make real estate artificial intelligence, which is it's machine learning, effectively. It looks through your various systems. It's pretty agnostic and tells you what's the next best phone call to make. So it's the real estate agent's dream, right? But as a result, she gets to go in and look under the covers of a lot of CRMs and real estate agencies. She was at one, and I don't think she'd mind me telling the story. They were bragging about the number of buyers they had in their database, 22,500 buyers in their database. And she's going, well, that's quite impressive. So she's so lovely, polite lady. That's very, very impressive. And she's going, so why do you even bother with marketing? Why would you put an ad on realestate.com.au if you in this city have 22,000 hot buyers lined up? And they're going, oh, it's true. Look in our CRM. And there it was, like this giant report run out with the classifier of active buyer. So she had to question the data, and it's going, well, how do you know? What's your evidence that this is an active buyer? And that's when she discovered, someone had basically tagged every human who'd turned up at an open for inspection in that city under that brand for the last 10 years with the tag active buyer. So data quality, what's the basic rules?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? The amount of tire kickers and next door neighbours that go for a sticky beat through a house.
I always go, I am that next door neighbour.
Yeah. And so, you're the active buyer on about, 300 properties in your local suburb.
Yeah. Now, they felt good about having 22,000 active buyers in their database. That was making them feel good. What would your advice be to them? Get over yourselves and be accurate, or?
Probably the same question that, she was asking, which is, well, what evidence have you got to suggest that this data is accurate? Oh, well, we wrote them there, 10 years ago? I mean, what do we talk about? Average turnover of a residential property in Australia is about 7 years. So
it's out now. It's 10 years.
Well, now it's 10 years, right? So I was an active buyer 10 years ago. Theoretically, I'm an active buyer again, right? Because there's that 10-year cycle. So maybe the data's right. It's not as silly as it sounds. But I think the answer there is, what have you got in place that's refreshing that information? Or does it make any sense to just go that we haven't looked at that record for so long? Is it actually valuable? Does it make sense to even keep it?
Yeah, well, that brings us to the other great project we were involved in, which was privacy. So this is a whole new realm, isn't it? Like, you need to have a reason for keeping data that long now, don't you?
Absolutely. And some severe penalties for doing the wrong thing too.
Yeah, well, if Europe's our example, GDPR, the simplest questions of GDPR, which I think your listeners need to look at themselves very, very closely about, go, if I ring you up and I say, remove me 100% from your systems, can you do it?
I'd be surprised if many can.
Well, what happens is, of course, that data does spread within organizations, particularly enterprises. A feed's taken out of Salesforce and taken across to Tableau, and it exists in someone's desktop in a model. And that's the flip side of doing this whole new kind of digital-based business. It's got a really cool upside, but there's costs associated with it. It's not free. And that, for me, if I had one piece of advice of people thinking about adding real investment to their CRM, is understand the operating costs.
Yeah. There's plenty of organizations popping up to say, hey, you know what, we can plug us into your systems and we'll help you with the triage of those requests and finding all that information. But again, you come back to connecting, right?
Yeah.
How good is this stuff, and how do you correlate those records?
I think the smartest thing he did was give the system at REA a product manager. Like, use that mindset that it is a product, an internal product, and it needs all of the things. It needs a great brand, it needs change management, it needs manuals, it needs training, I reckon that's great advice for any of your listeners to think about, is if you are hiring an internal product manager for their CRM, what would the job to be done? Yeah,
and that's an interesting one. You talk about, I think it was Michael Christensen was talking about what would the PD be for your platform. That's an interesting one too, right?
What measures would you give them as their success measure? Would it, for me, it would just be usage for a period of time. Can you just get your people using it in their workplace? And I'd want observational data, and I'd want some evidence. And because it's a novelty period of a month when everyone logs in at least once to look for something. But tell you what, 90-day usage would be a really interesting metric of success on your CRM project.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one too. You talk about everybody logs in the first month. Without naming names, there were some pretty senior people in some of these implementations who had never logged in, who are largely accountable for that adoption. So that's an interesting, the whole leader-led aspect of change management, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that just leads to increased cynicism from those people on the margins who are going, it's not really a useful system. It's not helping me do my job. It's just having you watch me from above. And it's a surveillance system, not an activity management system. Or the human dimensions are almost infinite.
100%. And I think that you're coming back to your point about treating it as a product and giving a product manager a genuine role to say, this is a product that you need to manage, then brings that element of, all the elements of product management together and how you run that, right? How do you attract customers rather than how do you drive it down their throat? There's a whole different mindset. What am I being measured by is a whole different mindset.
Oh, it is. And that push model of selling any technology in an organization has largely failed now after it's 2020. If you're not getting pull from your customers, which in this case might be the internal customer, but like the salesperson, for example, if they're not pulling features from you, this is never going to fly. That's like of those 5 factors of the lean way of doing work. That's the really key one, is enabling pull and work to flow through the system from the people closest to the customer.
I reflect on that implementation that we did at Real Estate, and then the earlier one that you described before that, right? And one of the first things that you kind of said to me was, there's let's just say, an interesting flavor in the mouth from the existing implementation that you're going to have to manage. which then led us to, well, how do we give a new brand? How do we give a new product? We came up with that concept, and then I think you even came up with the first design for what the branding would look like.
The helpful little dog that was going to go around and help you and retrieve. It was the helpful retriever who would find stuff for you. And I think having that kind of metaphor is, look, at my last kind of quantum mechanics management framework is something you've touched on in yours, is this differentiation of problems and challenges between simple problems and complicated problems, complex problems and chaotic problems, and how you approach solving those. And just buying software doesn't solve complex problems. It solves simple problems, but I don't think CRM, with its multiple stakeholders, multiple end users, and high cost, the customer is not a simple problem. It's not just do what you did last time. It's at best complicated, which is a very linear kind of A leads to B, leads to C, leads to click here, and the parcel is delivered. There's a bit of that in the world. And it's really, you're lucky if that's the case, but they're very easily disrupted, by the way. Those are the ones, you got no moat around your business as a defense against Facebook and Amazon on that case. Complex businesses are the ones that fascinate me, where there's not linear, there's multiple stakeholders, there's many loops in your value stream, and there might be politics and there might be hierarchy, and that's, I reckon, more common in this web-based internet world with growing enterprises. But you need to solve those problems much more cleverly than just implementing software.
And then again, the complexity of, as you say, in a 5 to 10-year-old internet-based business versus a transformation of a 200-year-old legacy, organization with politics up the wazoo and multiple lines of business, and very different approaches to solving similar problems because of culture, because of people, because of politics. It's nothing to do with the technology.
No, so we must credit Dave Snowden and his framework called Cynefin, which helps people navigate through that, and ultimately saves a huge amount of money, not by doing nothing, but by implementing things in thinner slices, solving them end to end, and sensing the landscape of the problem, and before you rush in and write giant checks and write giant RFP documents, and which is a little bit of my life today, by the way. Well, have we solved all the problems of the world?
I don't know. Have we solved them? Have we just poured fire on them? I'm not sure. Don't
know. I think my bottom line is never think of CRM as a technical problem.
Yeah.
That, as the original founders of Lean said, it's all about systems thinking, and systems are made up of people and processes.
Yeah.
Treat all of those as first-class customers and sense your way, build the scaffolding and your rituals and how you're going to do this, sense your way through and hire good people.
Yeah. I think cynics start with why often applies to, a whole bunch of the different dimensions of how you put people around a technology, right? You think about, well, not just why does the organization exist, but you're down into why are we making this decision about implementing this new project, or why are we making this change, or why are we structuring our teams a certain way, or why are we prioritizing our investment in a particular scenario? And I think that's the complexity of getting this stuff right. But the benefit of getting it right is, exponential.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of CRM implementations where the goal was very ambiguous.
Yeah.
And that's chaos when you've got a lot of people implementing an expensive piece of software. An ambiguous goal is your enemy.
Yeah.
And sometimes an unambiguous goal doesn't seem as ambitious, changing the world or otherwise, but gee, your chances of success are much, much higher. That's for sure.
Yeah. And the answer might be that the goal's proximate, right? It's not 100% clear, but where the direction you're heading in, you've got kind of a true north to rally around, and you can get started, right?
I've got some exciting news for you, because I know you're a fan of Richard Ramelt's work on good strategy, bad strategy, and proximate goals, which he was a huge champion of, which for people who are wondering what the hell does that word mean, it's like he describes it as when they did the experiment of landing on the moon, and NASA had to figure out what the surface was going to be like. And the range of options was immense, from rock to talcum powder. And narrowing in on something was delaying all engineering development accordingly until someone came up with the most highly probable theoretical landscape that they should plan for, which became their proximate goal. The thing you aim for, whether it's as good as a true north or not. Ramelt has a new book coming.
Oh, okay.
It's very exciting to hear, and his reflections, because that book's 10 years old or so now. His reflections on where strategy's gone and how important strategy has become. I'm very excited about that. Become a big student of strategy in recent times, and I realize we've got it the wrong way around in the West. We think strategy begets goals.
Yeah.
And I've learned that goals beget strategy. And the brilliance of a clear goal for a CRM system, I think, is where I'd say everyone should start.
Yeah. I think you're onto that. The goals beget strategy makes a lot of sense if you think about the entrepreneurial mindset, right? I know I want to achieve this thing. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'll get there.
Yes, you'll find the way, and being involved and in the work and having your scaffolding, which is, well, I've got this much money, I know this knowledge, and I know these people. That's your constraint by which you'll keep moving forward. But the challenge is the inflexibility of so many big enterprise software systems make it difficult to do a test and learn rolling discovery method. And well, that's why they need to hire you, mate.
Yeah, well, I think, and it comes down to the appetite for the organisation to say we're willing to do this iteratively and not be sort of bound to, there's a line in the sand where all new things work and all old things turn off, and that concept of it doesn't work that way, or it doesn't work well that way is probably a better way to describe it.
No, that line in the sand is difficult to find at times.
Yeah.
So,
mate, thanks for your time. Good to see you again.
A pleasure. We'll catch up soon and compare notes before Christmas and what we're up to and where we're going, and look forward to hearing how many people download this white paper. It is a great white paper. I love it.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Ciao.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.